Hey everybody, this is Dax. Today I'm going to talk about climate change, which used to be called global warming, which used to be called global cooling, but it keeps changing because the crooks, aka politicians, want to have something that, that can go either up or down, change. So that's why they talk about it, so they can control all of us. And I thought change was good. Isn't that what Obama Llama Ding Dong used to say? Change is good, hope and change. I hope that the weather changes. I hope that the climate changes. I hope it gets warmer. But today we're going to talk about the questions and answers concerning climate change, I'll just call it that, that never get asked, or the questions that never get asked and they never get answered. The reason for this is because they can't be answered. Right now, let's just call them climate change scientists. I mean, some of them are crooks also, but they can't answer these questions. And that's why they try to do legislation with pretend graphics and computer stuff. So I'm going to talk about those today. But before I get going on that, I've talked about climate change before. And the one thing that I've brought up is if the crooks really cared about people, they would want the earth to warm. Because as we all know, 10 times as many people die from the cold as do warmth. The average temperature of the earth is only 55 degrees. It's not much. And there's really not enough CO2 in the atmosphere for vegetation to grow perfectly, really well. This is one reason why greenhouses pump a ton of CO2, many of them do, so that they can grow better plants, better vegetation, better fruits and vegetables. So CO2 is good. Right now I'm breathing it out, you're breathing it out, we're breathing out cubic feet of CO2 every day. When we drive our cars, our lawnmowers, whether they're electric or gas, are causing CO2 to go into the atmosphere. Electric cars, when they charge up, that electricity they're using comes from power plants, which are emitting gases into the air. So electric cars are a farce. Anyway, so the primary question that's not asked is, if you know that CO2 is warming the earth, that more CO2 put in the atmosphere is warming the earth, then show us the equation. Show us if the CO2 goes up 5%, show us how much the earth warms at 5% increase. They can't do that. They don't do that. The reason they don't do that is because it can't be done. They don't know. They really, really don't know the effect that CO2 has on warming or cooling of the earth. They just don't know. They also don't know whether CO2 increases before or after the warming. The temperature, the measurements that they've taken show pretty definitively that CO2 actually increases after the earth has already started warming because of water vapor or sunspots or whatever. So there is no equation. You know, E equals mc squared, the famous equivalence equation between mass and energy, Einstein. Well, that's been proven to be true. And there's an equation for it. But there is no equation for CO2. There's no equation for changes in water vapor, which is a much bigger influence on the warming of the earth than CO2. CO2 is a trace element, folks. It's not even 1% of the atmosphere. It's not even 0.1% of the atmosphere. It's 0.025% of the atmosphere. It is a trace gas. A really marginal trace gas. The atmosphere, as you know, is 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and then just simply trace gases after that, methane, CO2, some other ones that I can't think of right now. But anyway, so it's a farce to say that increasing CO2 is actually causing the Earth to warm. And yet they say it with straight faces. When I say they, I mean crooks and crooked scientists. You cannot, as a scientist, you cannot go home, look at yourself in the mirror, and say, I told the truth today, if I'm saying definitively that increasing CO2 causes the warming of planet Earth. We simply don't know. I wish it did. I wish it did. I want the Earth to be warmer. Even though I live in Georgia, I mean, I woke up this morning and it was 44 degrees. That's too cold for me. And in the winter, it gets down below freezing sometimes. That's way too cold for me. And I have it good here in Georgia. I got friends in Canada, Montana, Norway, South Australia, other places, and they wish the Earth were warmer too. Most people on Earth do wish the Earth was warmer. You know, you've got the tropics, subtropics, etc. Maybe they don't. But you know, what's 1 degree going to be? What's 2 degrees? 3 degrees? 5 degrees? You know, I think the Earth needs to be warmer. But the fact is, there is no equation on CO2. There's no equivalence equation. You cannot say if the CO2 goes down this much or it goes up this much, it's going to cause this much cooling or this much warming. It just doesn't exist. And that says something right there, because that's what science is. If you've got cause and effect like that, you have to have an equation. You have to have it figured out. But there is none. There's even a new study that came out recently that says that CO2 increases actually cause cooling. Now, they also did not put an equation in there. So I don't think it can be trusted. But they had a whole lot of information in there. But still, there is no equation. So it can't definitively be said. And as we know, as I've said before, the Earth has been around for at least 4.52 billion years. The climate has changed drastically during that time, including in the last 2,000 years. Pre-industrialization in Roman times, about 2,000 years ago, the Earth warmed to where it is today. Then it warmed again in around 1000, the year 1000, as we know it. And then again, the medieval warming between 1000 and 1250. And that actually went up higher than it is today, the temperature. No industrialization. Why? They don't know. They try to hide these things. When I say they, I mean the crooks and the crooked scientists. And the United Nations, please, seriously, a government body, another government body, is attempting to talk about science. We know what happens when they do that. They want to control us. They want to control us and our businesses. That's what they do, so they can get money from us. But they either refuse to talk about those 2 warming periods, pre-industrialized warming periods, or they just write them off. But the fact is, they don't know why those temperatures went up without a CO2 increase. But that's what the Earth does. So they don't have any equations on water vapor, on sunspot activity, on the axis tilt of the Earth, on radiation coming in from space, which causes evidently a change in cloud cover, which reflects the sunlight. The amount of foliage on the Earth that absorbs sunlight and works with CO2 to create plant life. They got no equations for any of this stuff. These are the questions that should be asked. And the primary question being, do you have an equation yet? An exact, provable equation on CO2 and its increase or decrease and its effect on the warming of the Earth? We don't have all that. It's suspected now, and I think it's probably true, that it really is mostly directed to at the sunlight, at the sun's intensity. Who knows? Probably, but can't say for sure. But getting back around to principles, so those are the questions. We got to get those in before you can even talk about CO2. Those questions have to be answered. an equation, has to be offered, has to be proved. But the main thing is, it's not the government's job, it's not Al Gore's job or the government's job to stick a hockey stick with a thermometer in the air and say, oh, the Earth seems to be warming a little bit, and I think, oh, look at that manufacturing company over there, and it's putting a bunch of smoke and CO2 into the atmosphere, so that must be causing the Earth to warm up a little bit. Oh, it's not warming right now? Well, we don't know, but you know, I'm sure it's going to warm back up again soon because it hasn't been warming for 18 years. Even though our CO2 increases, China and India especially, our CO2 increases around the world have gone up dramatically. So it's not the government's job to take the temperature of the air. Yeah, sure, if a company is pouring pollution directly into a neighboring property and it's obvious, yeah, the government can say that's dangerous. They can go in and shut them down if there's direct proof. There is no direct proof on global warming. It just does not exist. Now getting back down to individual rights. This is what it all comes down to anyway. And this is what this whole channel is about. You and I have a right to our bodies, our property, and our money. We can do anything we want on there. Expel a little bit of CO2. Our neighbors are doing it also. That's understood. It's not the government's job to interfere. Even if there's a giant plant putting CO2 into the atmosphere on a big property. I mean, as long as it's not directly, demonstrably affecting my property, why do I care? It's going up into the atmosphere and Earth's not warming very much, certainly not warming enough for me to care, or for anybody really truly to care. So, when it comes to individual rights, we have a right to our own body, our own property, our own money. And if we start a business, the same thing goes. Those rights extend to our actions with that business. We want to start a big electric plant? Okay, we start a big electric plant. The government has no interest in that. It's our property. That electric plant is our property. And if we're emitting gases, we're emitting gases. So what? Who cares? As long as there is no direct effect. And this could be measured by the court system. They could say, well, there's a certain amount that you couldn't do, you know? Somebody sets up some sort of CO2 blower on the property next to me and is just pumping CO2 and methane or whatever onto my property and I can actually smell it and it's causing discomfort. Well, yeah, that would be, I would imagine, going over the line. But that's dramatic. It's something demonstrable. But that's not the way it is. So it's not the government's job the crook's job to take the temperature of the Earth or even determine how much CO2 or methane, trace gases, are in the air, or even see how much or how little the oceans are rising or falling. That's not their job. Their job is simply to make sure you and I are protected from each other and from the crooks themselves. Their only job is to make sure that our individual rights are honored all the time. That's it. So when they start bringing this stuff up, they're going to talk about violating somebody's rights and costing all of us a lot of money. That's just the way it works. Anyway, the whole point on this is the right questions have to be asked. If you see an article in the newspaper or magazine, online or whatever, and they don't answer that question, it's duplicitous. There's something going on. It's disingenuous. That's what those questions have to be answered first. Anyway, hope y'all are having a good day. Breathe some good clean air. Hope you got some good greenery around you. And I'll talk to you again soon. Take care.